The answer sparkled across the Family Feud studio like sequins under stage lights. Beautiful, bold, and completely unexpected. Steve Harvey stood at his podium, his confident demeanor momentarily shaken as he processed what he'd just heard. The bright studio lights that normally energized the room suddenly felt like spotlights in a courtroom, illuminating not just entertainment but the complex reality of what it means to love authentically. In a world that demands conformity, 42-year-old David Kim stood at the contestant podium in his conservative navy blazer and pressed khakis, every inch the suburban father he had been before his divorce. But in his dark eyes, eyes that had sparkled with glitter and false eyelashes on stage, eyes that had cried real tears in family court, there was a defiance that perfectly tailored clothes couldn't conceal. "We asked 100 people," Steve had announced with his trademark enthusiasm. "Name something people judge you for." He'd expected the typical responses that would generate knowing nods and maybe some laughs. Fashion choices, maybe. Career decisions, lifestyle habits. The kinds of judgments that were ultimately superficial, the sort that would light up the board and keep the audience engaged with relatable human foibles. Instead, David looked directly into Steve's eyes with the steady gaze of someone who had been forced to choose between authenticity and acceptance, and delivered 7 words that would transform this episode from entertainment into something approaching civil rights testimony: being both a father and fabulous. The studio fell into a silence that carried the weight of decades of discrimination, of custody battles fought and lost, of children separated from loving parents because society couldn't understand that gender expression had nothing to do with parental capacity. Steve's perpetual motion stilled as he recognized that this wasn't just about personal judgment. This was about systemic prejudice that used parental love as a weapon. Behind the cameras, producers scrambled to understand what was happening. This wasn't part of any show format they'd prepared for. Contestants were supposed to share lighthearted personal quirks, not expose the devastating intersection of LGBTQ identity and family law that destroyed lives while claiming to protect children. David "Destiny Divine" Kim had been performing drag for 8 years, transforming from a mild-mannered accountant into a glittering goddess who could command any stage with a lip-sync performance that brought audiences to their feet. But what started as a creative outlet had become ammunition in a custody battle that would tear his family apart. His ex-wife Jennifer had used his drag career to paint him as an unfit father, arguing that his lifestyle choices made him a dangerous influence on their 2 children, 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Lucas. Never mind that he'd never performed in drag around the children. Never mind that he was the parent who attended every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. Never mind that his children adored their father and had never shown any confusion or distress about his artistic expression. The family court had seen a man in makeup and decided he was a threat to traditional family values. "Mr. Kim," Steve said softly, setting down his cards and moving away from his podium. Something in David's expression had triggered every instinct Steve had developed over decades of reading people who carried invisible wounds. "Tell me about this." The question opened floodgates that David had been trying to keep sealed through months of legal battles, supervised visitations, and the growing realization that living authentically could cost him everything he loved most. "I perform drag on weekends," David began, his voice steady despite the tears gathering in his eyes. "I transform into Destiny Divine, this incredible, powerful, beautiful character who can make people laugh, cry, feel joy. It's art, it's performance. It's me expressing parts of my creativity that I never knew existed." The Kim family stood at their team podium. His mother Grace, his sister Susan, his brother-in-law Mark, and his teenage nephew Tyler, all of them shifting uncomfortably as their private struggle was exposed under studio lights. This game show appearance was supposed to be a fun family outing, not a public trial of David's right to be both authentic and paternal. "My ex-wife Jennifer," David continued, his voice breaking slightly. "She took photos of me in drag from my Facebook page. Photos of me performing at charity events, raising money for LGBTQ youth shelters, bringing joy to people who needed it. She presented them to the judge as evidence that I was an unfit father. The rival family, the Hendersons from Alabama, stood frozen at their podium. They were a conservative family who had never questioned traditional gender roles, never considered that a loving father might express himself in ways that challenged conventional masculinity. They'd come for fun and prizes, not to witness someone's civil rights being stripped away in the name of protecting children. "How long since you've seen your kids?" Steve asked gently, though he suspected the answer would break his heart. 4 months, David answered immediately. 4 months since I've been allowed unsupervised visitation. 4 months since I've been able to read Emma bedtime stories or help Lucas with his homework. 4 months since I've been able to be their dad instead of a court-supervised stranger. The studio was completely silent now. Even the usual rustling of programs and shifting in seats had stopped. 300 people held their breath as this man revealed the price of authenticity in a society that claimed to value both individual freedom and family values, but couldn't reconcile the two. "What does the court say?" Steve asked. "The court says," David replied, his voice gaining strength even as pain flickered across his features, "that my alternative lifestyle poses a risk to my children's moral development. They say that being exposed to gender non-conforming behavior could confuse them, damage them, make them question traditional family structures." He paused, looking out at the studio audience, 300 people who represented the full spectrum of American opinions about family, gender, and the rights of children versus the rights of parents to be themselves. "What they don't say," David continued, "is that Emma and Lucas have never been anything but proud of their dad. Emma used to brag to her friends about how her daddy could do amazing makeup. Lucas once asked me to teach him how to walk in heels because he thought it looked like a fun challenge. The Henderson family, their competitors in this forgotten game, found themselves emotionally invested in a story that challenged every assumption they'd made about family, about gender, about what it meant to protect children from harm versus protecting them from love that looked different than expected. My children," David said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "They understand something that the adults in the courtroom couldn't grasp, that love doesn't have a dress code. They know their father loves them, whether he's wearing a business suit or a sequined gown, whether he's David the accountant or Destiny the performer." Steve found himself moving closer to David, drawn by recognition of a particular kind of courage, the courage to love openly in a world that used that openness against you, to remain authentic even when authenticity meant losing everything that mattered. "What's the hardest part?" Steve asked. "The hardest part," David said, and now tears were flowing freely, "is explaining to my children why they can't see their daddy anymore. Emma keeps asking what she did wrong. Lucas thinks he's being punished for something. They don't understand that the adults who claim to be protecting them are actually protecting them from love." The camera caught David's mother, Grace, in the audience, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son articulate the pain she'd witnessed but couldn't fix. She'd raised him to be honest, authentic, kind, and now those very qualities were being used to separate him from his grandchildren. "Do you regret doing drag?" Steve asked, playing devil's advocate. "No," David answered immediately, with more conviction than he'd shown all day. "Drag saved my life. It taught me that I could be creative, powerful, beautiful in ways I'd never imagined. It connected me to a community of people who understood what it meant to express your truth, even when the world tells you that truth is wrong." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small rhinestone pin, catching the studio lights like a tiny star. "This," he said, holding it up, "Emma gave it to me after my first drag performance. She said it was so I could always sparkle even when I wasn't Destiny." She was 7 years old, and she understood something that family court judges couldn't grasp, that her daddy was the same person whether he wore this pin or not. Steve felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't about protecting children from harmful influences. This was about children being separated from a loving parent because his form of artistic expression challenged traditional gender norms. David, Steve said, using his first name now, making the connection personal. What would you say to the judge who made this decision? I would say, David answered, looking directly into the camera as if addressing the courtroom that had failed him, that my children have never been safer, happier, or more loved than when they were with their father. I would say that teaching children that love comes in many forms, that creativity should be celebrated, that authenticity matters more than conformity. Those aren't harmful lessons. Those are life-saving lessons. The studio audience began to react, not with applause but with the complex sounds of people processing a perspective that challenged comfortable assumptions about family, gender, and the protection of children. I would say, David continued, his voice growing stronger, that the real danger to my children isn't having a father who does drag. It's living in a world where love is conditional on how well you perform gender roles that someone else has decided are appropriate. Steve began removing his suit jacket, his movements deliberate and symbolic. The jacket was expensive, perfectly tailored, representing success achieved while conforming to societal expectations about professional presentation. David, Steve said, draping the jacket around David's shoulders. This jacket represents something I've worked my whole life to achieve while staying within the lines society drew for me. But you know what it doesn't represent? David looked up at him, curious about where this was leading. It doesn't represent courage, Steve continued. It doesn't represent authenticity. It doesn't represent the kind of love that's so strong you're willing to risk everything to live your truth. You have something that can't be bought, can't be imitated, can't be taken away by any court. The knowledge that you've loved your children authentically. The jacket fit David perfectly, but somehow it looked different on him than it had on Steve, less like conformity and more like armor for the battle he was fighting. Your children, Steve said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood what real strength looked like, are learning the most important lesson any parent can teach. That love is stronger than prejudice. That truth is more powerful than tradition. That being authentic is worth fighting for even when the fight costs everything. Steve turned to address not just David, but the entire studio, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who had witnessed too many families destroyed by prejudice, disguised as protection. To anyone watching this who thinks that gender expression determines parental fitness, he said, looking directly into the camera, let me ask you something. Would you rather have a child raised by someone who loves them authentically, or someone who loves them conditionally? He turned back to David, his expression filled with respect and determination. And to you, David, I want you to know that your fight isn't just about your children. It's about every LGBTQ parent who's been told they have to choose between authenticity and their family. It's about every child who needs to see that love comes in many forms. The game show had been completely forgotten. This wasn't about points or prizes anymore. This was about civil rights, about the intersection of family law and discrimination, about whether society would evolve to protect love in all its forms. There's something I want to share, David said, reaching into his phone and pulling up a video message. This came from Emma last week. She's not supposed to contact me directly, but she found a way. He played the video, and Emma's 10-year-old voice filled the studio. Hi, Daddy. I miss you so much. I don't understand why I can't see you, but I want you to know that you're still the best daddy in the world, even when you're destiny. I'm proud of you for being brave enough to be yourself. I love you whether you're wearing makeup or not. The studio erupted, not in typical game show applause, but in the emotional response of people who had just witnessed a child's love transcending adult prejudice. Grace Kim left the family podium and crossed the stage to her son, tears streaming down her face as she embraced him publicly for the first time since his divorce proceedings began. I'm proud of you, she whispered, loud enough for the microphones to pick up, for being authentic, for fighting for your children, for teaching us all what courage looks like. 6 months later, Steve Harvey received a photo in the mail. It showed David Kim and his children at an LGBTQ pride parade, Emma wearing face paint in rainbow colors, Lucas carrying a sign that read, "My dad is a hero," and David in full Destiny Divine regalia, glittering in the sunshine as he held his children close. The note attached read, "Mr. Harvey, the appeals court overturned the custody decision. A new judge reviewed the case and determined that my gender expression had no bearing on my parenting ability. Emma and Lucas are back home where they belong, and we're stronger as a family than we've ever been. They've learned that love wins, that authenticity matters, and that families come in all forms." Today, David Kim has joint custody of his children and continues to perform as Destiny Divine at charity events and pride celebrations. His story has been cited in legal briefs supporting LGBTQ+ parents' rights, and he speaks at law schools about the intersection of family law and anti-discrimination protections. Emma and Lucas have become advocates themselves, speaking at school assemblies about family diversity and standing up for classmates who don't conform to traditional gender expectations. They understand something that many adults struggle to grasp: that love doesn't require conformity, that strength comes in many forms, and that the most important thing about a parent isn't how they express their gender, but how fully they love their children. The rhinestone pin that Emma gave her father still sparkles on every outfit David wears, both as himself and as Destiny. A reminder that authenticity isn't just about personal expression. It's about creating a world where the next generation can love freely, express themselves boldly, and know that their worth isn't determined by how well they fit into boxes that someone else has constructed. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is love yourself fully while loving your children unconditionally, teaching them that the courage to be authentic is the greatest gift any parent can give.